Hey, good morning, good morning, good morning. Oh, thank you. If you're just visiting with us for the very first time, thank you so much for checking out Bay State. My name is Stephen. I'm one of the pastors here, and we're in the second week of a sermon series called Visions, where we're taking a look at the book of Daniel in the Bible. So if you have a Bible, I want you to open up there because we're going to get to that real quick. But we're looking at a book of the Bible called Daniel through kind of a different viewpoint, through the vision or perspective of the different main characters in this story. Daniel takes place in a very interesting time in the Israelites' history. See, at the very beginning of this story, you have this evil empire who comes in and they roll through Israel. They take the capital city. They kidnap a number of the young men who are part of the royal family in Jerusalem, and they bring them to Babylon, the capital city of Babylonia, and they teach them how to be a part of the royal staff, how to be wise men, sorcerers, advisors, and be useful to the king. And this king, this guy named Nebuchadnezzar, is looking at this as a way of influencing these young men to become part of Babylon. But the whole story of Daniel, what we find is that it's actually a story of how a few of the young men who were brought over to Babylon end up becoming an influence, a godly influence, in a nation and in a culture that was very far from God. And so Daniel in chapter 1, what we looked at is it started off with Daniel being one of those few men who's brought over to Babylon along with these guys named Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And they're all brought over, and they start off lonely, they're isolated, but slowly, as they continue to stand firm on their convictions, but also show compassion towards people who don't share those convictions, they end up gaining more influence and more honor in this culture. And so at the very end of chapter 2, we're going to fast track a little bit because we're getting to our main characters for this week. We covered chapter 1. At the very end of chapter 2, we see that this influence has been good news, not just for Daniel, but also for these three guys that were brought over with Daniel. And so at chapter 2, verse 49, it says, "At Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego." Now, those are the three guys that were brought over with Daniel, three guys that are at least mentioned with Daniel. This isn't their real names. Their real names are Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael. Those were their Jewish names, but throughout this chapter, throughout the story, we're going to hear Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He appointed them to be in charge of all the affairs of the province of Babylon, which that's a big deal. They're not from there. They had no standing at first. They were basically kidnapped and slaves at first. Now they're in charge of everything to do with Babylon, while Daniel remained in the king's court. And this is where we're picking up today. See, at this point in the story, Daniel is now in this inner room, this inner chamber, this inner circle of the king. He has the most influence out of anybody in the entire kingdom on the king. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are now over all the workings and all the dealings, all the events in this capital city of Babylonia. And this is where we're picking up, chapter 3. Chapter 3, verse 1 says, "King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide." When I first read this, I thought it said 90 feet tall and 90 feet wide, and I was just like, that's just not. I even had a lot of things planned of that's not a very flattering statue, 90 feet wide, and then I realized it's 9. I had all these jokes gone. Anyways, but set up in the plain of Dura, you didn't need to know that, in the province of Babylon. And he sent messages to the high officers, officials, governors, advisors, treasurers, kings, magistrates, and all the provincial officials, which would include Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, to come to the dedication of the statue that he had set up. Now, this is important because Babylon was huge. They had taken over all this territory, had ruled over all these nations, just plowed through all these different forces, and so they have people from all over. And Nebuchadnezzar is saying, this statue is so important that I want all of my magistrates, all of my officials, all the governors from all over the kingdom to come to this one place. It would have taken time to send out letters to them, time for these people to travel in. This is a huge deal that everything that he's done is built up to this moment in his rulership. He wants everyone to come to the statue. So all these officials came and stood before the statue King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Now, this is also important. Throughout this chapter, you're going to see whenever the statue is brought up, it says the statue the king had set up. I don't think Nebuchadnezzar had swung a hammer in the process at all, most likely. He had a bunch of people who'd done this for him. But every time the statue is brought up, it says the statue the king had built, the statue Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Meaning, Nebuchadnezzar is taking this so personally that this is his personal pet project. This is the thing that in his mind he's saying, this is my statue. How you treat this thing is how you treat my rulership. How you worship and honor this thing is a direct reflection of how you see me. He's taking this really personally. This is something that's like the main marquee thing in his entire empire. And then, verse 4, it says, then a herald shouted out, people of all races and nations and languages, which that goes to tell you how big Babylonia is. That they're saying, everybody from all nations, we've conquered all of you. Everybody who speaks all these different languages, because our kingdom's so big that we have all these different languages that are represented here. So whatever language you speak, everybody from all races, we have all these different races who are represented here. Listen to the king's command. When you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and other musical instruments. That also tells you how big the kingdom is, because they're just like, everybody's got their own musical instrument from their different cultures. So if you like a harp, you like a zither, you're more of a bass guitarist, like whatever your thing is, and they even run out of the list, so they go, or other musical instruments, like whatever you hear music, you got to do something. When you hear the sound of any of these instruments, bow to the ground to worship King Nebuchadnezzar's gold statue. Not marble, not granite, not quartz. This thing's gold. That's a big chunk of change. 90 feet tall, 9 feet wide, not 90, but still pretty impressive, right? But this thing is gold, right? And so he has invested a small fortune into building this statue. Anyone who refuses to obey will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. It kind of escalates a little quickly, right? Like everybody hears the statue, they're like, what amazing thing, long live the king. And then he goes, you'll be thrown into a furnace. And they go, oh, I don't like this one. So at the sound of the musical instruments, all the people, whatever their race or nation or language, bowed to the ground and worshiped the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Now, there's something you have to understand in order to get what's going on here. You have to understand in the ancient world how kind of power and religion work together. So for much of the ancient world at this time, if a ruling nation came in, they overpowered another nation, well, behind every nation and their rulership, their leaders, it was the idea that their gods and their pantheon of gods was at work behind them. And so the king or emperor would have represented or been like an ambassador or seen as an avatar of their gods or their godly pantheon. The military of that nation would have been looked at as a reflection of the power of their god. Even their culture embodied the character of their gods. And so when a nation would conquer another nation, what it was viewed as the more powerful nation, their gods were more powerful than the nation they conquered. To the point where oftentimes when a nation would roll in and conquer another nation, the conquered nation would just give up on their religion. Because they'd go, even if our gods are real, they're nothing compared to the ruling nation that just walked in. And that's what gives Nebuchadnezzar, in his eyes, the authority to say, okay, this is who you're worshiping now, because the gods have blessed me. The gods are on my side. I've conquered all of you, so all of you have to submit to me because I'm the avatar of these gods. In fact, they've even allowed me to build this giant gold statue, so obviously the gods are with me, so you need to do whatever I tell you to do. That Nebuchadnezzar would have been seeing this statue and having everybody worship this statue in Babylon, not just as a new religion, but also as a way to unify his entire kingdom. That he has people of all different nations, all different languages, all different cultures, and now he's saying, we've gotten so big, I need you to unify under this new umbrella, swear allegiance to the statue, and in doing so, you're swearing your alliance to Babylon. And anyone who didn't bow to the statue wasn't just dismissing his huge project, wasn't just dismissing all the money that he poured into this. What they're doing is they're not aligning themselves with Babylon, and they're not recognizing Nebuchadnezzar's authority in his eyes, which explains what happens next. Verse 8, but some of the astrologers went to the king and informed on the Jews. This is long before the phrase snitches get stitches. they said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "Long live the king. You issued a decree requiring all the people to bow down and worship the gold statue when they hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and other musical instruments." Save us some time, just say music. That decree also states that those who refuse to obey must be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whom have been put in charge of the province of Babylon. They pay no attention to you, your majesty. They refuse to serve your gods, and they do not worship the gold statue that you, once again, they're playing into his own ego, that you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar flew into a rage, and he ordered Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to be brought before him. When they were brought in, Nebuchadnezzar said, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego?" And that's noteworthy in of itself, that the king is kind of playing this authoritative chess game right now, because the king knows that's not their real names. That he brought them in, he kidnapped them, brought them from Israel. They had Jewish names themselves, but he brings them in and he calls them Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, these Babylonian names that they had given them. That he's actually trying to leverage, I brought you in, you're in the palace, I own you now, I'm not even recognizing your old name. The fact he's calling them by the Babylonian names and he's the king of Babylon is him playing this power card. You belong to me. And he says, "Is it true? You refuse to serve my gods or worship the gold statue I have set up. I will give you one more chance to bow down and worship the statue I have made when you hear the sound of the musical instruments. But if you refuse, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my power?" Because in his mind, he's conquered everybody. Like he is the avatar of whatever the strongest God is in his mind. So who could rescue you from my power? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you." Which I'm sure he was thinking, like, okay, I'm relieved. Like, you don't have to defend yourselves. This whole thing's not true. And then they say what they say next. "If we're thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up." Now, I love this part because Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they actually refer to the king, even in the middle of the heat, even in the middle of this tension where he's literally saying, "I'm going to kill you." They don't go into disrespect or dishonor. In fact, they call him your majesty several times. That they still show him honor, they still show him respect, that their statements aren't defiant arrogance. And the only reason it even reads remotely like any level of defiance is because the king is demanding complete compliance. That they're not actually trying to disrespect him, they're not trying to belittle him. Their statements aren't about trying to put the king in his place. All they're trying to do is tell the king that nobody can take God's place. That's all they're doing. Like basically what they're saying is, your king, your majesty, our king, if whatever you need to be called, you own Babylon, but you don't own us. God does. And so we won't bow to your will, because we will never allow our will to serve our God's will bend to your will. So you can be king, but God is still God, and he's the one who owns us. So you can have your place. And I doubt Nebuchadnezzar had ever been talked to like this. And I doubt that because of what happens next. Because that goes about as well as you could expect it would. And so this is what happens, verse 19. Nebuchadnezzar was so furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that his face became distorted with rage. He commanded that the furnace be heated 7 times hotter than usual. Then he ordered some of the strongest men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So they tied them up and threw them into the furnace, fully dressed, in their pants, turbans, robes, and other, just in case you weren't sure what fully dressed means, it includes their pants. And because the king in his anger had demanded such a hot fire in the furnace, the flames killed the soldiers as they threw the 3 men in, which should mean if these 3 guys throw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the furnace and they're burned up, they should be killed immediately as they're thrown in, right? But then this happens. It says, so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, securely tied and fully clothed with their pants on, fell into the roaring flames. But suddenly Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in amazement and exclaimed to his advisors, didn't we tie up 3 men and throw them into the furnace? Yes, your majesty, we certainly did, they replied. Look, Nebuchadnezzar shouted, I see 4 men, unbound, walking around in the fire unharmed, and the 4th looks like a god. Now here's something you should know about Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar might be arrogant, he might be a ruthless authoritarian, he might be brutal, he might demand complete and total adherence to everything he says, but he is anything but an atheist. All through the story of Daniel, we see Nebuchadnezzar exploring big questions, looking for answers, looking for spiritual guidance, even from the Jewish people that he brought in, that he's looking at and saying, like, I've conquered your God. He would ask them for advice and wisdom and input, that Nebuchadnezzar is open to the idea of other gods or an other god. In fact, likely the reason why he built the statue that we see in this chapter is because in a dream in the previous chapter, he saw a giant statue. And so he asked Daniel to interpret the dream for him. And so he's open to advice and spiritual wisdom. Nebuchadnezzar was really closed off to any input from anybody he believed was below him, which is part of the reason why he was so feared by everybody, and it's really unhealthy leadership. But he was incredibly open to the idea of a higher power above him. And so, when he sees this, someone rescuing him from his own authority, this is what it says. Nebuchadnezzar came as close as he could to the door of the flaming furnace. He just saw 3 guys get melted in front of him, and he still goes up to the door because he's so stupefied about what's happening. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stepped out of the fire. Then the high officers, officials, governors, and advisors crowded around them and saw that the fire had not touched them. Not a hair on their heads was singed. Their clothing was not scorched, and they didn't even smell like smoke. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel to rescue his servants who trusted him. They defied the king's command and were willing to die rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Like, what a turnaround from this guy. Therefore, I make this decree. If any people, whatever race, nation, or language, speak a word against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you kind of go like, I think he's starting to get it. They will be torn limb from limb and their houses will be burned into heaps of rubble. Maybe he doesn't get it. There is no other God who can rescue like this. Okay, maybe he gets a little bit. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to even higher positions in the province of Babylon. This is such a cool story. There's deliverance, there's excitement, there's danger, there's tension, there's God rescuing people. There's even many scholars have debates about who exactly was in the fire with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Was it Jesus himself rescuing people who are faithful to God from the flames, from the heat? Like, there's all sorts of discussion. Like, there's no proof fully either way, but it's just kind of like a cool, like, there's a lot going on in this passage. But while most of the focus tends to go in the story on the fiery furnace, and that makes sense. It's exciting. It's kind of the big tension. It's the climactic moment. The piece that I find most interesting and most relatable is actually the conversation that these 3 guys have with the king right before the heat gets turned up. Because Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego could not control what the king would decide. They could not control the conditions inside the furnace. They could only control themselves. And what I find really relatable in this story is that while hopefully none of us are dealing with a literal fire, let us know if you are. You can have my number, but 911 will be more helpful for you. But while none of us have dealt with a literal fire, all of us deal with heat. all of us have experienced spiritual heat. And you could call it whatever you want. You could call it tension, you could call it pressure, you could call it temptation, stress, whatever you want. But all of us have dealt with and will deal with spiritual heat at some point in our lives. See, it was way easier for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to stay faithful to God when they were living in Israel. When everybody around them shared their beliefs, their values, when everyone around them was on the same page about who they should worship, what they should do, it's way easier to represent God. It's way easier to act like a Christian in church. It's way easier to act like a Christian when everyone around you is sharing those same values. But then, if you're in a moment where you're trying to obey God when no one else is, the heat gets turned up. When you're in an environment where you're trying to forgive somebody, but the wound is fresh, the fresher that wound, the higher the heat, right? Like, it's way easier to forgive somebody about something you forgot about because it was not that big of a deal years ago. Okay, yeah, man, I forgave you years ago. But when they do that same thing in the moment, you go, I can't believe you. It's way harder to represent Jesus when temptation comes around because the heat is higher. And so all I want to do this morning is I just want to give you a few tools that you're going to need if your faith is going to survive the heat you might even be in right now, or the heat that you will inevitably face, because even if it's not from the enemy, it's just from living life. Anybody ever experienced heat before, spiritually? You will experience it again. That's an unfortunate promise from your pastor. But there's a couple tools that you're going to need if you're going to survive the heat. And the first tool from this story is that you need friends who will show up. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, all the time, all throughout these chapters, are mentioned together. In fact, it kind of becomes a little annoying reading the story because every time you have to, it's not just one character you're reading, it's three really hard names to say, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, like every time. It's like, could we just, every time I was reading the story or I was telling everybody about like what we were doing this week, all my VeggieTales people were like, oh, Benny, the story about, like all those. I didn't grow up with that, and so I have no idea what they're talking about. But in chapter 3, verse 11, you have the advisors of the king, and they're ratting out the Jewish people who are not bowing before the statue. And this is what it says. It says, that decree, this is them quoting, that decree states that those who refuse to obey must be thrown into the blazing furnace. But there are some Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whom you have put in charge of the province of Babylon. They, all together, they're listed together. They, not just one of them, not just two of them, no, they, the three of them are linked together. They pay you no attention. They refuse to serve your gods. They do not worship the statue you have set up. Now, that's some Jews. The only three that we have mentioned are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Most likely, we can assume that Daniel wasn't worshiping the statue, but Daniel was probably exempt from a lot of the gossip that was going around in these circles, because Daniel was in the most inner room of the king. He was in the innermost circle. And so these guys probably are a little afraid of Daniel because they want to get into that room someday. So they're not going to rat on him. So he's probably exempt from that heat. He's dealing with some different heat on his own that we'll find out in later chapters. But these guys listed together, they're the only three that we see that are listed who are not bowing before the statue. The next verse even says, all the people, regardless of their nation, their race, or their language, bow before the statue. So what made it different for these three? Well, if you read the first three chapters, and I just kind of like combed through it as I was going, I counted all the times that any one of them is mentioned. And we have 20 different times. Chapter 1, verse 6, 7, 11, 15, 17, 19. Chapter 2, verses 13, 17, 49. Chapter 3, verses 12, 13, 16, 19, 20, 23, 24, 26, 28, 29, and 30. And guess what? Every time one of them is mentioned, it's all three of them. There is no reference to any individual out of these three. In fact, I realized as I was looking at this chapter, if you had asked me before I was studying for this series, or if you had said, oh, my favorite character in all of the Bible, and you just said, it's Meshach, I would have had no idea who you were talking about. Anybody else? We don't want to admit it, or if better yet, if somebody used their Jewish name, like, I'm a big Mishael guy. I'm a big Hananiah guy. You just go, who? Oh, from Shadrach, Meshach, like we know them with the three of them combined. And I think, honestly, we tend to look at that nowadays almost like it's a negative. That we live in a really individualistic culture where success actually kind of means for us that you stand out, you're unique, and you're different or set apart from everybody else around you. That success means that you're different, not that you're in the mix of everybody. But for these three to have success in their faith, it required that they were inextricably linked to each other. That's actually what allowed their faith to survive. And as I was looking at this, all 20 times that they're mentioned, it's all three of them. It just made me want to ask, if your name comes up, who are the people that you're linked with? And if you're married in the room, I don't mean your spouse. Like, you should be linked with your spouse. But men and women, we need friends who are men and women who can support each of us the way we need to be supported. So men, you need friends. That's actually kind of fun. You need guys in your life who aren't just going to talk about sports. And you need guys in your life who aren't going to just try to help you escape reality through sports, a couple beers, or video games. You need friends who are going to help you confront your reality and challenge you to be the man that you say you want to be. Ladies, and I'm going to get in trouble for this one. Ladies, I think you're better at this, kind of. I'm going to look at my notes and just read them. That way I'm not making eye contact. You need ladies in your life who aren't there just to make you feel better. Some of you are angry at me because I made you feel bad by saying that. And you're going to try to talk to a lady friend who's going to make you feel better because you're angry that I said that. Ladies, you need friends in your life who care more about you than your feelings. Can I get amen from women so that the men can say amen? But you need to challenge yourself to look for people who won't just affirm you, confirm your hunches, or empower you to make poor decisions or hold grudges. Thank you. And for both of you, like both men and women, here's the deal. You need people in your life who don't just make you feel better, but challenge you to be better. That's true for both of us. Because men, we have a tendency to just escape reality. We go, you know what, life feels too tough, or there's too many decisions to make, I got too many responsibilities, so I'm going to disconnect from everything. And ladies, you tend to go to people who are going to make you feel like whatever direction you're going in, it's like, it's okay, or it's okay not to make this shift, or it's okay to date this guy. No, you need somebody who's going to tell you flat out. And men, you need a lot of that same thing. And I know, I'm looking at some of you who are looking at me, and you're kind of mad. And you're smirking at me. And I'm avoiding eye contact with you. Actually, I challenge our entire leadership team with this idea. We tend to ask, who's in my corner? And even when I said you need friends who are going to show up, you probably went through a little Rolodex in your head. I wonder who's really there for me. Anybody? Do we all do that? You immediately thought, who's in my corner? I challenge our leadership team with this idea because I think as leaders, but I think this is true if you're a follower of Jesus, you need to ask a deeper question. The question isn't who's in my corner. It's whose corner am I in? Because the simple question, we go, well, nobody's in my corner, so that's why life's so hard. Get in somebody else's freaking corner. Because life is that hard for them. Like, whatever you're feeling, they need somebody in their corner. Like, what if you looked at the church, rather than the church is here to encourage me, you went, my job is actually to encourage the church. My job is to be here for my other followers of Jesus, my other brothers and sisters in Christ. It's not just on them to do something for me. If I'm a follower of Jesus, I follow the lead of Jesus, who he loved first. If I were to list the names on the screen of everybody in our church, and I had all of you text in who you think is in that person's corner, who are the people that you know are tight with that person, would your name even come up behind somebody else's? Or are you waiting for your name to show up and see how many names pop up behind yours as people in support? Love the cough. That was good. That was really good comedic timing. But like, Ethan, I know you got Micah, you got Sam, you got people around you. But how many people would it take if we listed everybody for one of our names to show up behind them? Or are you just wondering, I wonder who's behind me? Because for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they weren't looking at it just as, I really need you guys right now. They did need each other. But each one of them was devoted to the other, not looking for, I wonder how much these guys are committed to me. Ecclesiastes 4:12 says, a person standing alone can be attacked and defeated. And this verse usually gets used at weddings, and it's not, just so you know, it's not a marriage verse. Because it says, but two can stand back to back and conquer. And that's usually where people are like, yeah, that feels good. Like, that's why we get married. So we have two people and we can conquer the world. And then it goes, and three are even better. And some of you guys are like, still a marriage verse. And then we go through the whole thing, well, God's the third, blah, 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 but we don't use that same logic when Hebrews says, where two or more are gathered, there I am with you, because then we don't go, well, it's me and God, and that means we're the church. We don't do that. And even just context clues, it goes to a person, and then it goes two, we're assuming that's the same species, two people, and then three, right? Okay, I'm not going on that. But the idea, it says three or even better, for a triple braided cord is not easily broken. Anybody ever feel broken? Being alone makes it worse, right? Because not only does it make it easier to be broken, it makes it so any more tension on a broken cord makes it closer to snapping. That's why the bigger thing you're pulling, the more cords you need on that rope. You need other people, but you need to be there for other people. Because there are people in your life that probably come to mind when I say, you have anybody in your life who's close to snapping? They need you. And they can't be dropped by you as soon as they don't support you anymore, because their burden is heavy too. That's when they need you to be there for them. And it's not just people in our church. Like, what if I listed the people at your school? Are you in any of their corner? What if I listed the people at your work? What if I listed your actual neighbors? But then we go, well, being Christian means loving God and loving your neighbors, but then none of our neighbors even know our name. I'm going to go back to my notes. The second thing that you need, so you need people who will show up. The second thing you need is to believe that God can show up. Verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. If we're thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. See, all they had was the simple belief that God could do anything. And that simple belief that God could do anything allowed them to face off against things that otherwise we would be too afraid to look in the face. Like what they're dealing with right in this moment, they're in front of the blazing furnace. Nebuchadnezzar has heated it up, they're talking with him, and they're staring in the eyes of the most powerful person on the planet in this moment. He's leading Babylon, which was the most powerful force on the planet, who steamrolled over their nation, who desecrated their temple to their God, who held their lives in his hands now. They had every justifiable reason to believe God wasn't going to come through. Because at this point, like I told you, the cultures around them, if somebody took over your nation, well, obviously their gods are stronger than yours, because if your gods were real, why would they allow a defeat? How could they ever allow a defeat? And so now they're looking at this and they're going, it would be easy to turn our backs. We're guaranteed survival if it's just one bow. We're guaranteed survival if we just give in. And we don't even know, like even if our God was real, is he even stronger than the gods of Babylon? They had every reason to turn the other way. But they simply looked at Nebuchadnezzar and said, we believe our God can do anything. They simply believed that God could show up. And I find in the middle of heat is usually the moments where we forget that God has the ability to show up. When we look at the heat around us as justification reasons why God's not going to show up. But if you're a follower of Jesus, you should be driven by what you believe God wants to be done rather than looking for justifiable reasons to believe that God is done. The last thing you need to believe, or the last thing you need, is that you need to believe that God is worth it, even if he doesn't show up. Verse 18. But even if he doesn't. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were not driven by this idea that God was obligated to do something for them. It wasn't that, oh, God has to rescue us because we're the good guys. They literally say to Nebuchadnezzar, even if God doesn't, which wasn't like, oh, if God doesn't show up, I lose my job. Or if God doesn't show up, then I don't get the blessings I was hoping for. No, if God doesn't show up, they're thrown into a fiery furnace and burned alive. There's real consequences to if he doesn't, but for them it was still worth it. Because then they say, we want to make it clear to you, even if God doesn't do anything for us, if he doesn't rescue us, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods. We will never worship the gold statue you've set up. This takes crazy faith because this is faith that's fully placed in the person of God, not just the results that you believe God has to give you. Here's the principle. A faith that can stand the heat is a faith in who God is, not in what God can do for you. It's a faith in who God is to you, not a faith in what God has to do for you. It's not about the results of God, it's about the relationship with God. And the results will come as you commit yourself to the relationship. They had no guarantee of God's deliverance. They had no guarantee that God was going to come through, but they believed that God was worth the heat, even if he didn't rescue them. I'll give you an uncomfortable promise from your pastor. I already gave you one. Here's your second one. I guarantee to you that at some point in your life, God won't show up the way you want him to. I guarantee it. Because if he had to show up the way you want him to, then who's God? It's you. At some point in your life, God's not going to show up the way that you want him to. But if you stay faithful to God, even when he doesn't deliver according to your will, you'll get to see him deliver according to his will. Most severe example of this, everyone dies. Super positive messaging this morning, right? Everyone dies. If you're a follower of Jesus, you're probably like, I get heaven, but Brian, you've made this joke all the time. I want heaven, but I don't want it today, right? All of us? Like we'd like God to give us breath in our lungs the next morning. Best case scenario, let's say it's old age. At some point, God's not going to deliver the way you want him to, and that's the end of your life. In that moment, that God didn't show up the way you wanted him to is the exact moment where God is going to show up forever and ever for you. If you remain faithful in the darkest times, you'll get to see God deliver in what will be the brightest day. But you have to simply choose to believe that God is worth it even if he doesn't show up. We have examples all throughout Scripture. Isaiah, prophet Isaiah, he spoke for God to the Israelite people. He was sawed in half. We have Peter. Peter was one of the closest followers of Jesus, remained faithful to Jesus, wrote some books of the Bible, started churches. He was crucified upside down. We have John, the disciple John, the beloved disciple, the closest disciple. The disciples looked at John and said, he's Jesus' favorite. He was boiled alive, exiled, and starved, tortured. Isaiah, in the moment he passed, was in the presence of God. Peter, crucified upside down. The moment his consciousness left his body, was awake in heaven. I don't know if he appeared upside down and then fell to the ground. I'm not sure. But he's with God himself. John closes his eyes at the end of his life. And the next time he opens his eyes, he's opening them in heaven. Each of them believed that God was worth it even when he didn't show up the way they wanted him to. And because they were faithful and believed God was worth everything, God became their everything forever. Last verse for you. 2 Timothy 2. It says, this is a trustworthy saying. If we die with him. If we die with Jesus. That's severe. That's stepping into the furnace severe. That's I'm giving everything to Jesus. If we die with him, we also live with him. If we endure hardship, we will reign with him. If we deny him, he will deny us. Here's the promise on the other side. I love this verse. If we're unfaithful, he remains faithful because he cannot deny who he is. I don't know what decisions the heat has made you make. Maybe for you, you've made some decisions because of the heat in your life that you're not proud of, and you wouldn't exactly call yourself faithful. Here's the beauty. God remains faithful even when we're not. God is still there even if you're not very proud of where you landed this morning. What you need to take steps towards faithfulness, what you need to take steps towards continuing on in this faith and growing in your faith, growing closer to God, experiencing more of him in your life, in your family, in your neighborhood, at your work, all of that. What you need is friends who will show up. And if you don't have any of them, then be one of them and you'll find them. Because the type of friend everybody wants is the type of friend that you should be. You need to believe that God can do anything. The people who've done the most good for the world are the people who've remained faithful, that God isn't done. God's not done with Bill Ricka. He's not done with you. He's not done with your family. He's not done in your workplace. He's not done in your school. He is still alive and at work here. And you need to believe that God is worth it even if he doesn't show up. That even if God doesn't deliver the way I want him to, he will deliver the way he wants to. And that's worth it to me. I want you to bow your head, close your eyes. God, I thank you for reminders like this story. Hindsight 2020, we get to see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego rescued from the fire. But from their perspective, as they're talking to the king, the heat was real, the threat was real, the rescue hadn't happened, and it wasn't promised. And God, I'm asking that you would give us the boldness and courage to take steps of faith like that. When we're not guaranteed the good life, we still believe that you are good. When we're not guaranteed comfort and security, we still trust that we're secure with you, so we make decisions based on heavenly values, not earthly values. If there's anybody in the room who's facing the heat, I want you to know first off that all of us face the heat. You're not alone, but also from a spiritual perspective, all of us are running toward an end without Jesus that ends with heat. There is a God who can rescue you from the heat. There's a God who can stand there in the fire. There's a God who can rescue you from it. But you need to choose that God. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego didn't turn their hopes to the gods of Babylon for rescue. They didn't turn it to anybody. They turned to the God of the Word. And so if you're in the room right now and you don't have a relationship with Jesus and you're feeling the heat of life, the one who can deliver you from the heat, maybe it might be the consequences of your decisions, maybe it might be a past that you haven't been able to escape, but the God who can stand there with you and walk you through it is Jesus. You need to choose him and him alone. If you want that relationship with Jesus right now, the Son of God, the Savior, Messiah, the one who God sent to rescue you, then I just simply want you in the quietness of this moment to pray, Jesus, I give you my life. If you're in the room and you're feeling the heat in other areas, maybe it's at work, maybe it's marital tension, maybe it's family, maybe it's just you feel alone. The first thing you need community. You need people around you. You need friends who are going to show up. You need to stop choosing the wrong people to help you towards the wrong direction. It's not just anybody. Just anybody makes us feel less lonely. But the right people steer us in the right direction. You need to choose the right influences. And maybe that starts by you showing up for some people that you know you need in your life. Start by encouraging them, and what you'll find is it's reciprocated. You need to believe that God can do anything. He can get you through where you are. But if he keeps you where you are, because he's growing you in the middle of it, you need to believe that he's worth it and hold on to him closest. Father, I thank you for this morning. I thank you for your word. I just ask that you would continue to help us choose you in the middle of the heat. Amen.